My bad omen. This happened late this September, around 11:30 p.m. at night. I was walking across my university campus in a parking lot next to the Life Sciences building. I, happy as a clam, as I was on my way to visit my boyfriend of 2 years. This is important, don't forget it. I got to a part of the parking lot that kind of ends and turns into a woody area. It's nothing more than a thin strip of land that wasn't cut down during the construction of campus in the 19th century, so everything is pretty well grown, and trees make a mini forest. It separates the parking lot from the Life Sciences Center, which is a big concrete building, an example of a brutalist architecture from a few decades ago. In this mini forest, as I always think of it, I happened to notice a girl out of the corner of my eye. At first glance, I thought she was a rock, but I was quickly surprised to see that it was actually a girl, casually sitting amid the trees. Now naturally, I was a little creeped out. It was almost midnight, the campus was unusually quiet for a weekend, and these little wooded areas always creep me out a little bit. The lights from the lamps in the parking lot don't penetrate very far, so there's lots of shadows and dark areas around, lots of areas for someone to hide. I look at her just long enough to figure that she's not hurt or in any sort of trouble, but long enough to be creepy myself. I'm a guy, it's a university campus, enough said. I couldn't see her very well in the darkness, but she had a vacant and almost serene expression. I remember that. Like she was very deep in thought in something. She didn't look at me. She had black hair and a modern haircut that went to her shoulders. All things considered, despite randomly sitting very still in the trees late at night, she looked like a reasonably normal university student. I turned my head and pretended she wasn't there as I walked out of the parking lot and along a path that led along the outside of the woodsy area to another part of campus. Now, this is kinda hard to explain, but the path leads up and away from the woody area to a well-lit alley between the concrete walls of the Life Sciences building, which is kind of a creepy area by itself. Once I got to the top, the woody area would be out of sight, so I let curiosity get the better of me, and I took one last look from the path to where the girl was. My heart did that clenching thing, and my palms suddenly broke out into a sweat. Of course, I was expecting her to be right where she was sitting. Nope. At first, I didn't even think she was there. I looked around and there was no one. It was only when my eyes really focused into the woods that I realized where she was. She was lying face down in the prone position on the grass in the trees. What the fuck? So of course, I'm staring now, and as I stare, I can see that she's laying perfectly straight and her head is pointing completely down, more or less mashed into the ground. Remember, I was pretty far, so it was hard to see the details. I just stared for a little bit, thinking she might turn her head to check if I was still there or something like that, but she didn't move. Not a muscle, not a twitch. It looked almost like she was all tensed up, as if she was trying to avoid being seen, or ready to get up sprinting. I did the ungentlemanly thing, and I noped the fuck out of there, run walking into the alley, and shaking like a leaf the rest of the way to my boyfriend's place. He lives in residence on campus. I was trying to figure out if what I saw really just happened. I mean, it's not every day that you see that. I tried to rationalize it as a prank or something else, but the more I think about it, the more it doesn't make sense. Now, this is just an addendum to the story, but there's a good reason why I consider her my own bad omen. When I get to my boyfriend's place, he convinces me to call our security campus people, which I should have thought of in the first place. I told them I wasn't comfortable checking if she was alright, so they said they would. Creepy girls in the mini forest don't sit well with me. I've read too many stories on the subreddit. My boyfriend then sits me down, tells me he's almost got with another guy, and begins a long process of breaking up that lasts until the next day. I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere, and it has not been a great time for either of us over the past month. I blame the creepy girl, but not really. This encounter is one of the top two most unsettling things to ever happen to me. So, to the creepy girl in the mini forest, let's not meet again. Old man in the forest stalks me. So, long time lurker, first time poster. Alright, so a little bit of background on me before I start the story. I struggled all my life with severe anxiety. I used to have crazy blackout panic attacks when I was little, which as I got older, manifested into depression and insomnia. I often overthink things as I try to go to sleep, so I have a hard time sleeping. When I do get decent sleep, I often experience sleep paralysis, which has made me terrified to sleep for a normal amount of time. This all plays into the story, as I often get up and walk around to think and to calm myself if I am having an anxiety attack. So, back to the story. This happened about a month ago. The time was about 2 a.m. or so in the morning, and as usual, I couldn't get to sleep. I was having trouble with my ex and couldn't stop overthinking everything. As per usual, I got up and wandered. I walked up to a park a few miles away from my house. It's usually empty that time of night, and I often would go into the middle of this foresty area and just kind of sit and calm myself down. Being surrounded by nature often helps me calm myself. I was sitting on a log and listening to some sad music, trying to void my thoughts, just doing my usual ritual, I guess you can say, right? All of a sudden, I heard leaves rustle about 10 to 20 yards away from me. I looked and saw nothing, so I just figured it was a small animal, and I continued doing my thing. After a few minutes, I heard more rustling and heavy breathing. I have a friend who suffers from the same things I do, and sometimes we'll meet up at the park and talk about stuff. I texted him saying we should meet up there, but he actually didn't respond to me. I thought maybe it was him climbing up the hill where I was at, so I loudly whispered his name, but there was no answer. The breathing got closer, the breathing got heavier, and I didn't want to deal with whatever it was. I've read stuff on here long enough to know better. I got up and briskly walked to the other side of the park, probably a 20-minute walk. It's a big frickin' park. I sat down on a bench and took my earbuds out so I could hear what was going on around me. I then heard something that made my hair stand up on the back of my neck and my heart dropped. I heard the creepiest, sadistic sounding laughing wheezing from what sounded like 100 to 150 feet away. I was in a pretty open area though, and couldn't see anyone. I was scanning the tree line when I saw him. This creepy, wiry old man with the cane coming out of the brush, staring straight at me. He started hustling, moving much quicker than I would think that someone as old as he looked He looked maybe in his 70s, maybe, could possibly move. I got up and started walking. I started walking away, hoping that he didn't actually see me, hoping that he wasn't here to get me, hoping that I had nothing to do with this old man, as he started cackling loudly and yelling, "Get back here, kid!" I'm a rather big 17-year-old guy who was wearing a black hoodie, covering most of my face. I'm often mistaken as much older than my actual age, and with the hood up in the dark, he would actually have no idea that I was a kid until he had been close enough to me to clearly see my face. From a distance, from that distance, especially in the dark, I looked like a grown man. I started to run, and as I got to the nearest exit, I turned, and he was somehow only a little bit behind me, just over an arm's length. I don't know how he caught up to me that fast. I mean, I'm not the fastest runner, but I know I'm faster than some old dude with a cane, right? When I looked back, he grinned this big toothless smile and said, "Why are you running? I just want to be friends." I sprinted home, zigzagging through little different blocks, so I knew I'd lose him, locked all of my doors and windows, and went to bed. It was a weird encounter, but I've had weirder before at that park. The thing that makes this weird is that my manager at work told me that some old guy came in last week saying, "Is my name in today?" I wanted to talk to him. I really want to be his friend, but he doesn't seem to want to be mine. I don't know how he figured out my name, let alone where I work, but I'm scared shitless of what else this guy knows. I'm in a band, and we were in the local newspaper a while ago, so that could be how he figured out my name, but who knows? My manager told me she'll call the police if he comes back. So, creepy old dude I see at 2 a.m. in the morning in the park, and came to my work and asked about me. Let's actually not ever meet again. Woods of northern Wisconsin. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in the Chickamauga National Forest in northern Wisconsin, and after our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people with weapons. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the UP, but never to this area. I mean, we're not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature. But this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us, especially in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section in the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, much like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of the northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forest. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to a parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, bunged-up pickup truck, complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed that they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of the road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of this encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way to the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lowness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed our time by talking about various things. We had an Asian filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We were so tired. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and even drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but that night there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I just closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend actually was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent, hearing the noise again. Our old tent had a mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were in had no windows at all. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal got our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise itself was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. My heart was pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still, as to not give away our location. I mean, for all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence, with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then, we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to be getting louder or getting closer. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or just decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put away our tent. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance of the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall. There were a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew that we were getting closer to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car at all. We threw our gear into the trunk, and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of the road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station, but the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to our destination. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin.